Your company is going under, you almost got fired, and now you've been accused of murdering your boss. And, of course, you're the prime suspect. And in true casual game logic, it's up to you to clear your own name because the cops are completely and utterly incompetent. My name is Graeldon, I'm reviewing Steam games in alphabetical order to find the hidden gems among the piles of garbage, and today we're playing 100 Days Without Delays. Let's begin. 100 Days Without Delays was released in February 2022, developed by Joyful Software and published by HH Games, which, given the logo, I'm assuming stands for Heaven and Hell, but you would be forgiven for thinking that these devs make games or videos for more mature audiences. You might be somewhat less surprised to find that they specialize in casual games, including genres such as Match 3, Solitaire, Hidden Object, and Mahjong, all with various themes ranging from fantasy to historical and everything in between. Interestingly, clicking on Joyful Software takes you to the same page as HH Games, so I can only assume they are actually the same company. If someone knows why they would do this, please let me know in the comments. Is there an actual business reason for this, or is it simply tax evasion? Either way, I look forward to eventually playing all 191 of their currently released games. That was sarcasm, by the way. First up on the chopping block though is 100 Days Without Delays, a game about building an airport in 100 days because the preferable alternative to unemployment is apparently trying to meet unrealistic deadlines with zero guidance, training or resources for minimum wage. And this is framed to be a good thing that people should want to do. Oh, and did I mention that this is a Match 3 game? Yeah, this is a Match 3 style game that your grandma would probably enjoy, and the game is divided into 100 levels and you earn a star for completing each one, with different parts of the airport requiring a different number of stars to build. So it's kind of like Gardenscapes, but with 100 levels instead of the 15,000 it has, as of June 2024 anyway. And just like Gardenscapes, it's available on mobile devices, but there, the developer is listed as Gamehouse, so I'm not sure if even the devs know who they are working for. It's all rather confusing at this point. Trying to map out who the heck actually made this game has got me feeling like a conspiracy theorist with a room full of red string trying to figure out what the heck is going on. But anyway, let's dive into the game itself, because the story begins with the main character, Lee, being told that she is being fired due to an unspecified global crisis, but is offered an opportunity to stay with the company by building an airport to service workers that need to travel to a nearby oil field. Because we were thrown right into the plot, we didn't have a chance to check out the main menu, and that's because there isn't one. There is an options menu though, allowing you to toggle sound, music, full screen mode, and a custom cursor, which looks like a paper plane. It looks terrible, so I turned it off right away. There are also toggles to customize the difficulty, such as having a time limit for each level, a limited number of moves, which is on by default, or a relaxed mode. You can only choose one of these options though, so you can't have both limited time and moves at the same time. I'd also like to mention that you can view the credits here, and at the bottom it refers to Joyful Software and Zoom Out Games, who created the 12 Labors of Hercules series of games that we'll be looking at in the future. Interestingly, their website makes no mention of this game whatsoever. The conspiracy deepens, and now I am convinced there's a lizard man at the bottom of all this. Anyway, onto the gameplay. It's a Match 3 game. You swap two colourful tiles to make a match, remove them from the board, and then the tiles above fall into place. Not sure what you were expecting, honestly. You can create power-ups by matching 4 or more of the same tile in a square or a line, and these are activated by either clicking them or swapping them. You also get 3 special abilities on the right of the screen, which took me way too long to figure out how to use, because clicking them opens another menu with a tick and a cross, and the tick is greyed out. Turns out you need to click the ability, then the tile you want to use it on, then the tick to activate it. Or just click the ability and then double click the tile you want to use it on, that works too. These abilities are very powerful, allowing you to either destroy a single tile, a row or column of tiles, or every tile of a specific colour. I will admit that the resulting cascades of matches that often occur after using one of the big abilities can be pretty satisfying. Each level has a specific goal, ranging from matching a certain number of different coloured tiles, using matches to remove leaves to reveal hidden tickets, destroying a number of objects with either matches or power-ups, or lowering hats to the bottom of the grid. Levels can also use a combination of these goals, but again, this isn't exactly new to anyone that's dabbled in these games before. So what does this game do differently that sets it apart from the rest? Well, it's a paid game costing $6.49 Canadian, and it has no microtransactions or ads, but other than that, absolutely nothing. Unless you're playing on mobile, in which case it's completely free. Except for the ads that I assume it has, but if I'm being completely honest, I didn't bother to check. However, what the game does have is a story. And given how this whole thing started, I'm curious to see just how terrible and awful the writing really is. So, join me on this experience that would rival a modern soap opera if it were written by an AI who doesn't understand what an actual conversation between humans looks like, and then translated from English to 10 different languages and then back to English again. Firstly, these cutscenes play after building a new upgrade to the airport, and everything is delivered through text boxes, which can be accidentally skipped, as I did on multiple occasions, and you cannot repeat dialogue at any point. The first person we meet is Bob, the owner of the airport. Lee asks him for construction plans, communications, and a record of assets. Pretty sensible stuff so far. All they have though is an old mail plane and some staff. So, next we meet Michael the mechanic, and this is where the plot already begins to derail and get nonsensical. Michael is the mechanic, and the workshop is a mess because the boss is trying to save money by keeping a bunch of spare parts from other machines and projects to use for repairs. Lee responds to this news by saying that cutting corners on security is stupid. Sorry, what? Where did security come into this? Are we having two different conversations? Regardless, we ask about the plane and head out to meet the pilot, who is about to leave. In a move that should have guaranteed that Lee is fired, she opens with the line, "Wow, what a hunk." To which the pilot responds by saying, "Yes, I'm the state champion in... ... trailing off and leaving us to guess at whatever he might be implying. I just want to say that in case you hadn't noticed, the writing is awful, and if this is meant to be a sincere attempt at pickup lines, then it feels like it could only have been written by someone who just discovered the human race and the English language. Oh, and after these lines, the conversation immediately moves on without acknowledging what just happened. No clue what the pilot's name is yet, but he tells us about the awful state of the plane, runway, and facilities, and then we head off to check in with the boss. But only after completing 2 match 3 levels. Upon finishing the second level, we discover that our boss is dead. I guess we're not getting that pay rise anytime soon, huh? The scene appears to start midway through a conversation with a new stranger, apparently a policeman or investigator of some kind, and we explain that we found the boss dead when we entered the room. We're accused of having some conflict with the victim, calling him a drunkard and a fool, and promising to quote-unquote deal with him. We're told that we can't leave the airport until it's all resolved, as we're now a key suspect, which means that we're going to be investigating the case ourselves, of course. Now, according to the script files, this conversation is meant to end with us saying, "Okay, I'll be staying in our new hotel." However, unless this appeared for a single frame and I missed it, this line was bugged and didn't actually appear. Also, this indicates that each of the sections of the airport we build are meant to have specific names or functions, and the section on the left is apparently a hotel. In the next thrilling scene, we don't get an update on the case, but instead have an incredibly awkward conversation with a guest staying in the hotel. I just love the opening line of "very soft bed" without any context or setup. It's just a weird old man trying to give a compliment in the most awkward way possible. Disappointed by the lack of planes at an airport, they ask where they can eat, and the scene ends without any answers or payoff. And weirdly, this guest will be incredibly important later. Now, for the sake of storytelling, please try to keep in mind that there will be anywhere between 1 and 4 match 3 levels to complete in between each scene. But to keep things moving, I'm not going to mention it anymore so we can just focus on the story. But I just want to be clear that this isn't one big scene and that the total story takes place over the course of about 7 hours of playtime. Lee's lunch is interrupted by the pilot, who informs us that they found some ravens pecking at cards on the tarmac. Interestingly, one of the cards, the Joker, has a drawing of Bob on it. Or maybe it's drawn by Bob, given the next line saying, "I'd recognize his amateur style anywhere." So we have a card with a drawing of/by Bob, and apparently this means that Bob was possibly a gambler. Alright, sure. In a conversation with Michael, he mentions that he tried, unsuccessfully, to convince Bob not to drink at work. We also notice a box of brand new parts that Michael explains come from a new batch for a plane in the hangar. I don't know about you, but Michael's looking mighty sus right now and definitely trying to hide something that's going on with these old and new parts. The pilot finds us again and seems to be on our side, mentioning that Bob was apparently shoved in the chest, which is a brand new detail that we're just learning now. There's some terrible flirting, and the pilot mentions a control tower, so the two decide to head there and check it out. Inside is evidence of a gambling den. Empty bottles, dice, playing cards, and some kind of picture that isn't explained. You really have to question how we as the player are meant to be able to solve the murder when we aren't even told what the evidence is that we've found. And honestly, given the next scene, I don't think that even the devs know. The investigator agrees that there's no way that Lee could have physically attacked and killed Bob, because as a woman, she must be weaker than even an old man, but also dismisses the picture found in the control tower as evidence. The next line suggests that perhaps the picture implied some sort of argument or disagreement between Bob and another player, and then gives us a spot quiz about gambling. We get it wrong, which apparently helps to clear our name, but by the same logic, this should incriminate the investigator, because surely only people knowledgeable about poker rules would be involved in this case as suspects. That said, the investigator seems to think that Michael the mechanic might be involved, as he apparently owes money to half the city. How he knows that, I don't know. Maybe he's actually good at his job, but I somehow doubt it. After the next building upgrade, we've apparently promoted Michael, despite him being a prime suspect, and increased his salary. At some point, we learned that he has 5 children, which he didn't want to tell Bob about, for reasons, and was borrowing money from him instead of asking for a raise. We give him an envelope with some extra cash and insinuate that he should spend it in the new shopping area that we've apparently built. Also, apparently building gift shops is a higher priority than getting some planes to actually fly. The pilot advises us that we need to expand the warehouse to store the right kind of fuel for the new planes, which is one of the very few sensible things he ever says. And then we chat to Michael, who's coming with his big package. Phrasing, Lee, phrasing. It seems we caught Michael with his hands on a big package of new spare parts. Again. Michael confesses that Bob asked him to use the old parts to repair the Douglas plane and to instead take the new parts to a nearby railway station where they were sold off. He left them in a locker, then Bob got paid and Michael got extra time off. And none of this makes sense, because this presumably means that they were buying parts and then selling them to a third party at a higher price. So why didn't the third party just buy them from the original supplier instead? And why the secrecy? It's not like there's anything illegal happening here other than the awful quality of the script writing. The pilot stops by to compliment Lee on building something and mentions that Michael seems to be down at the moment. Out of nowhere, Lee accuses the pilot of disliking Michael, who claims that there is some bad blood between mechanics and pilots in general, and reiterates that Michael is a prime suspect. Well, I didn't exactly like the pilot before, but now I both dislike and distrust him. Reporting back to the inspector, we inform them that Michael couldn't possibly be the killer because he's a nice guy, TM, and a family man. And we all know that family men can't be cold-blooded killers, no matter how in debt or desperate they happen to be. The inspector then immediately segues into telling Lee about a fire that happened at a small warehouse in the middle of the desert, which was filled with aviation parts. Well, now we know where the deliveries ended up, but not why. There's also no road there, so they must have been transported by plane, and the investigators suggest we question the crew here to see if anyone has been flying out there. Because even though he's the investigator, he's clearly too busy to do any actual investigating. And of course, we're not being paid for this, it's just extra work on top of our already impossible task. But Lee's a girl boss, so she's got this. Chatting to Michael reveals that if there's red sand on the landing gear of a plane, then it has probably recently been in the desert. Amazing detective work there, everyone. Never would have figured that out on my own. Yet another reason why I hate sand. Not only is it coarse and gets everywhere, but it also marks me as a murder suspect. We ask Michael when the last time was that he saw something like that, and the scene ends before we get an answer. Awesome storytelling, devs. Simply amazing. If no one knows anything, then everything's a mystery. In the next scene, the pilot returns and presents us with a bouquet, proclaiming with cringe-inducing poetry that he has found himself unable to fly recently as he is constantly drawn to the ground, back to her. Did anyone else just vomit in their mouth a little? Well, apparently Lee didn't, as she outright asks if the pilot, whose name we now learn for literally the very first time, is called Ray, if he's hitting on her, insinuating that it's inappropriate. Ray responds by asking her out for dinner. Classy, Ray. Classy. The two of them do end up going out for dinner because apparently the airport has a restaurant now, and Lee uses the opportunity to question Ray about the planes traveling into the desert. He is actually helpful and mentions that only light sports planes could make the trip and land successfully, so that helps to narrow it down. He then offers to escort Lee back to her room, a request that is neither accepted nor rejected in the scene, so feel free to imagine whatever you wish, because goodness knows it's not actually going to affect anything. Heading back to Michael, he mentions that a plane fitting the criteria is owned by one Yang Kin. And yes, that's his name. A railroad tycoon and owner of the nearby railway station. We actually met him earlier. He was the tourist that loved the soft beds in the hotel, and it seems that he was actually trying to scout us and get info without us knowing. Ah yes, it's all coming together. I can see how everything links together and plays out. I can see why Yang Kin would murder the airport owner, Bob. Actually, no, I can't. As far as we know, Yang Kin is only involved in the bizarre trade of used/new aviation parts. No real motive for murder there, just questionable trading behavior. Well, apparently Lee is also confused, as she immediately tracks down Yang to question him, but he is appropriately mysterious, revealing nothing, but advising that he'll come by tomorrow, whenever that is in game time, and may have some helpful information. Now, in what I can only assume is an attempt at some comic relief, we witness Ray giving a bouquet of flowers to a flight attendant, and I feel justified in my dislike of Ray. I knew he was an ass, I knew it! Lee then heads to a meeting with her boss, who reminds us that we only have a few days left to complete the contract, and at this point I'm slightly confused because we only just completed level 52 out of 100, but maybe there's a bunch of plot that happens after the airport's finished. Evidently, one level isn't equal to one day, which is what I originally thought, and time is just passing at whatever rate it feels like. Whatever. Lee informs him that the first flight takes place tomorrow, so we're actually way ahead of schedule anyway, and reassures him that we'll solve the investigation soon, because once again, that's totally our responsibility. We're almost immediately informed by the investigator that the railway company has served us with a claim for part of the airport's property, and we have to cease operations immediately. Lee objects, stating it will ruin the first flights that are scheduled for today. Now, this scene takes place 2 levels after the previous scene, so time is definitely being wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey and just plain inconsistent, because that should mean that 100 levels equals 50 days, but that's clearly not the case. Anyway, apparently the previous, now deceased boss, Bob, took out a mortgage on the airport and the railway company is now calling it in. Firstly, that's not how any of that works. And secondly, for how sneaky Yang was trying to be, this is a great way to transfer all of the heat and make himself the prime suspect. Great job, Yang, not sus at all. Lee lets the officer know that we'll sort it all out and that we're just missing one piece of evidence, which is amazing because so far the only evidence we have found is a card with a drawing and a dusty plane. Ray then comes crawling back, attempting and failing to win Lee back, and he reveals now that he saw the picture that was on the Joker on a light plane belonging to the railway owner. Thanks, Ray, but we'd already figured that out. Get your cheating ass out of here. Michael then comes forward to tell us that he was actually the dealer during the poker games between Bob and Yang, and claims that he didn't tell us earlier because he was afraid he would be suspected of murder. Michael, you already were suspected of murder. In for a penny, in for a pound, right? He also mentions that the police said that Bob died from falling from a stepladder, possibly trying to get something off a bookshelf. Objection! We were clearly told that Bob was pushed, which caused him to fall and somehow die. This is clearly a contradiction, making you, Michael, the murderer. Case closed, everyone. Let's go to the bar. Drinks are on me. Wait, what's that? We believe him? Yes, because this narrative is inconsistent and nothing makes sense. Fine. Drinks are off, sorry. Back to work. Lee presumably then heads off to check the office again and then reports back to the investigator, revealing that she failed to find anything on the bookshelf, but did manage to find a slip of paper and a receipt under the leg of the table that the clearly incompetent detective and crime scene investigation team somehow managed to miss. These have something crossed out in the upper right-hand corner, and we ask the investigator if this reminds him of anything. The answer is clearly no, because the scene ends right there. However, we apparently took it to court, which dismissed it as an insignificant piece of paper, which I'm not surprised by because you aren't allowed to submit new evidence in the middle of a court case, so they wouldn't have accepted it anyway. And to be honest, this is a pretty confusing conversation. We tell Yang that they were right to file a lawsuit, which is the first we've heard of it. We know there's a murder case and a mortgage claim and now a lawsuit for something, which is presumably where we submitted the slip of paper. Lee also mentions that we met at the airport on the day of the murder, but that was never mentioned. The first time we saw Yang was after he stayed at the hotel, well after Bob died. Yang gives a pretty backhanded compliment, saying he didn't expect Lee to be so smart, although that must mean that I'm dumb as heck because I don't know what's going on. Lee suggests that they cooperate in the future, and Yang says he'll stay to watch the first flight because unless it's successful then they won't have a partnership to even discuss. Lee and Ray the cheating jerk have a quick chat where he reassures her that everything is ready to go for the first flight and tells her not to worry. Lee says she's not worried, but she would be sad if after all this effort of playing match 3 games that something minor went wrong and the airport didn't get its license. Which, now that I think about it, makes zero sense because an airport would need a license in order to do an actual flight with passengers. So let's add zero understanding of the aviation industry to the list of things we know about the devs. The good news is that the flight is successful and Lee is told that she is in line to be promoted to top manager of something, to which she asks instead to remain on as head of the new airport. In the next scene, I actually can't tell if she got what she wanted or not, because she's told that she is the youngest airport manager in the company, which to me sounds like she's not the boss. She mentions that there are still a few changes to make and that she's grateful for the opportunity, or as we would call it, 100 days of occupational hell that the airport and airline company have given her. Also, the conversation swaps from Lee's boss to Yang, and I have no clue why. Now, the strangest part of all of this is that the scene that we just saw takes place after level 88, leaving you to collect 12 more stars and giving you nothing to spend them on. I even checked the game's files, found the script, and verified that there weren't any other scenes that bugged out and failed to play correctly. And if we pause to think for a minute, we realize that the murder is never solved. We don't know what happened in the court case about the mortgage, and we still don't have an explanation for the aviation parts being resold. The only plot point that is actually resolved is that the airport is completed and we're left with 12 more levels to contemplate what the heck we experienced. And at the end of it all, you can't even keep playing because the button is removed after beating level 100, so you're simply left with a vague sense of unease and feeling slightly used. like Ray's girlfriends. Screw you, Ray. Match 3 games are an incredibly oversaturated genre, so in order to be a good game, you need to do more than just the basics. You need to do something to stand out from the rest. 10 Million was a great example of this, taking the fundamental mechanics and shaking them up by moving entire lines of tiles and incorporating RPG mechanics and progression. 100 Days Without Delays is the opposite, bland and uninspired, and also possibly a bit racist. I didn't notice it at first, but when you stop to think about the characters, we have a young white woman as the protagonist. Okay, so far. The handsome white male is the love interest. The black man is poor and is implied to have too many kids and steals from work. The old Asian man is evil and trying to destroy an honest business and the career of a white woman. Yeah, when you string it together like that, it's not great. Potentially entirely accidental or the result of internal bias or stereotypes, but ultimately it's not a good look for the devs. Moving on, I have to say that mechanically speaking, it plays just fine, aside from the occasional graphical glitch where tiles vanish or duplicate when a cage moves from one tile to the next, but there was never anything that actually broke the game. There were 2 things that broke me though, trying to understand the story and the music. There are only 2 tracks in the game, and for something that takes roughly 7 hours to complete, that's far too few. It's probably obvious that I'm not a fan of this game, but don't get me wrong, I think that there is an audience for games like this, just like there is an audience for the 100 hidden objects style games. There are people out there that genuinely enjoy being able to switch their brains off and play something relatively mindless, especially if they can get it on their phone, or Steam Deck these days, to play in short bursts on a commute. And sometimes it's even better when it has a defined end and doesn't go on seemingly forever. But if you're looking at this and seriously considering buying it, please stop for a moment and try raising your standards. You're better than this, and you deserve better than this. This game does nothing you haven't already seen before elsewhere, with a relatively small amount of levels and a nonsensical, disjointed plot that only serves to make you question why you're even playing the game to begin with. So, with all of that said, my final rating for 100 Days Without Delays is a paper plane out of 10. It has a small amount of mileage, but is ultimately thin and flimsy. Thanks for watching. As always, a massive thank you to all of the channel members on screen for supporting the channel, with a special thank you to our Knight of the Holy Grail, Freaky Feline. I'd also like to thank you for joining me on this weird gaming adventure through the depths of Steam, and if you've made it this far, here's a sneak peek of the next game. Until next time, take care.